Bentonville 911, what's the address of the emergency?
It's 608 Southeast 8th Street.
Check in.
He was at the candlelight vigil, standing in the November cold with everyone else, holding a small flame in the dark, surrounded by the family and friends of the little girl he had taken 2 days earlier. He stood there. He watched, and nobody knew. That is the part of this story that stayed with investigators long after the case was closed. Not just what Zachary Holly did, but how completely, how effortlessly he moved through the grief of the people around him without a single crack in the surface. The officers who processed that vacant house 2 doors down from where Jersey Bridgeman lived did not talk about it the way they talked about other cases. Some of them did not talk about it at all. What they found inside that bedroom, what they understood about the hours that preceded it, and the fact that the man responsible had been sleeping in a house 40 feet away while an entire neighborhood searched for answers, that combination of things does not leave a person the same way other cases do. This is the full story. It starts 6 days after a little girl's 6th birthday, on a Monday night in Bentonville, Arkansas, in November of 2012. And it ends with a conviction that the community had to watch happen from a distance, because being in the same room as Zachary Holly had become something most of them could not bring themselves to do.
Bentonville sits in the northwest corner of Arkansas, tucked against the edge of the Ozark Mountains. If you have never been, it is exactly what the phrase small-town America tends to conjure. Quiet streets, dense tree cover, the kind of neighborhoods where families leave their doors unlocked because the idea of something genuinely terrible happening has always felt like something that happens somewhere else. The kind of place people move to on purpose, specifically because it feels safe. Jersey Bridgeman was 6 years old. She had brown hair and a smile that people who knew her described almost every time, unprompted, without being asked. She had recently started at Sugar Creek Elementary School in Bentonville, and by every account from her teachers, her classmates, and the neighbours who had watched her settle into life on Southeast A Street, something good was happening to this child, something that had been a long time coming. Because Jersey's early life had not been gentle. Her parents, David and Desiree Bridgeman, had separated and were sharing custody. On her mother's side, life was stable, normal, the kind of environment that a child needs. But on her father's side, behind closed doors, something very different had been happening. Investigators first became aware of a problem when Jersey's living situation with her father raised serious concerns that required immediate attention. What the investigation uncovered was a home environment that had fallen far below any acceptable standard. Jersey had been living under conditions that prioritized control over her basic comfort and her freedom of movement. When detectives questioned David, he claimed his intentions had never been to cause harm. He said he had been worried about Jersey moving around the house unsupervised at night. Detective Larry Taylor later recalled that David admitted the situation had started small and escalated gradually. He and his girlfriend Jana had apparently discussed safer alternatives, but said financial difficulties prevented them from following through. So instead of finding a proper solution, they chose one that fell seriously short of what Jersey needed. And when Jersey began showing signs that something was wrong, the response was not to stop, it was to adjust. By the end of 2011, both David and Jana were in custody. Both ultimately pleaded guilty. David received 18 years in prison. Jana received 12, with an additional 3 added later when a suspended sentence was revoked. For Jersey, it meant she would never return to that house again. She went to live permanently with her mother, Desiree. She enrolled at Sugar Creek Elementary, and by all accounts, something in her began to settle. Teachers noticed it. Family members noticed it. Even neighbours who barely knew her picked up on the quiet shift happening in this child,
who had already been through more than most people face in a lifetime. She lit up rooms without trying. She took her role as a big sister to 2-year-old Leah incredibly seriously, watching over her, caring for her with a tenderness that seemed beyond her years. One family friend said it simply. I honestly don't know how she made it through all of that, but she did, and she was always smiling. In March of 2012, Desiree moved the family into a house at 608 Southeast A Street in Bentonville. New address, fresh start, a chance to build something stable. And right next door lived a young married couple, Amanda and Zachary Holly. Amanda and Desiree became close quickly, the kind of easy friendship that forms between neighbours when life is full and help is appreciated. Zachary worked at a local restaurant, kept mostly to himself, came across as relaxed and good-natured. He had no visible red flags, nothing that made anyone think twice. Jersey called him Uncle Zach.
For a few months, everything actually seemed to be working. A new neighbourhood, trusted faces nearby, a mother doing everything she could to give her daughter a real childhood after everything that had already been taken from her. From the outside, it looked like the beginning of something better. It was not. By November of 2012, the arrangement between the two families had become completely routine. Whenever Desiree worked a late shift, or her boyfriend Brandon had evening hours, Amanda and Zachary would look after Jersey and little Leah next door. It had happened enough times that nobody thought about it anymore. It was just part of how life worked on Southeast A Street. A perfectly ordinary neighbourhood arrangement, built on trust, familiarity, and the kind of casual confidence that comes from seeing someone every single day. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? Jersey had just turned 6 years old. 6 days after her birthday, everything on that street changed permanently. November the 19th, 2012, a Monday evening. Desiree left for work, Brandon headed out for her shift. Jersey and Leah went next door, the way they always did, and the evening passed the way those evenings always passed. Around 11 that night, Desiree came home from work and went next door to collect the girls. Jersey was drowsy and quiet, the way children get when they've pushed past their bedtime. Desiree carried both of them back inside, tucked them into the bed they had shared many times before, and settled in beside them. And then Jersey did something she always did. She looked up at her mother through heavy eyes and whispered that she loved her to the moon and back, a phrase she used so often it had become her signature. The small, sweet way she closed every day. Those were the last words they spoke to each other. When Desiree woke the following morning and walked into that bedroom, Leah was still asleep. Jersey's side of the bed was empty. No note, no sound, no indication of what had happened or when. Desiree moved through the house quickly, checked every room, called Jersey's name. Opened closets, looked in every corner a 6-year-old might reasonably choose to hide. Nothing. She called her mother. Together they went through the house again. Still nothing. That is when the fear became something else entirely. Desiree looked out the window and spotted Amanda sitting on the front porch of the house next door. She went over immediately and asked if Amanda had seen Jersey that morning. Amanda said she hadn't. Desiree called 911 at 6:43 in the morning. Police responded without hesitation. When a young child is reported missing, there is no waiting, no easing into it. Every minute is treated as critical from the first second. Officers arrived at 608 Southeast A Street and began working immediately. They searched the Bridgeman home, room by room. They searched the Holly residence next door. They moved through surrounding properties and checked every accessible space in the immediate area. No sign of Jersey anywhere. No forced entry, nothing visibly disturbed, no broken locks, no open windows, nothing that pointed clearly toward what had happened or where she had gone. And then Officer Travis Nichols noticed something. The back door of the vacant house 2 doors down, number 74, was standing open. Not dramatically, not obviously, but enough to stand out against every other property on that street. The house had been sitting empty for a while. That door had no reason to be open. Nichols approached carefully with fellow officer Mike Henson. They moved through the entrance slowly, scanning the interior as they went. The house was dim and still, debris scattered across the floor, the kind of heavy silence that belongs to a place that has been forgotten by the world outside it. They reached the bedroom, and that is where the search came to an end. Officers stepped back immediately, secured the perimeter, and called for backup. A formal search warrant was required before the scene could be fully processed, so they waited outside and held the line while the neighborhood around them began to stir. Family members started arriving. Jersey's grandmother, Vicky, pulled up and walked straight toward one of the officers standing near the tape. She asked him quietly whether Jersey was inside. The officer couldn't find the words. He didn't need to. The look on his face said everything. Vicky said later that she understood completely in that moment. She knew before anyone told her. And that knowledge, arriving silently, through a look rather than a sentence, became one of the most difficult things the family would carry forward from that day. Jersey's maternal grandfather was brought in later to make the official identification. A moment no grandparent should ever have to face. The kind of thing that changes someone in ways that never fully heal.
Within the hour, Southeast A Street was unrecognizable. Police tape stretched across the block. Journalists arrived. Camera crews set up on the sidewalk. Neighbors stepped onto their porches in the early morning cold, speaking in low voices, trying to piece together what was happening just steps from their front doors. Near the Bridgeman home, a small bicycle sat exactly where Jersey had left it, still patient, waiting for a child who was not coming back. A deflated princess balloon rested on the ground nearby. Small things, everyday things, the kind of ordinary childhood details that become unbearable to look at in the wrong context. Bentonville Police Captain John Simpson made one thing clear from the start. Everyone connected to Jersey, anyone who had spent time near her, anyone whose path had crossed hers in the days leading up to that morning, would be looked at thoroughly, without exception. And somewhere on that street, the answer was already closer than anyone realized. Bentonville Police and the FBI began working the case together within hours. This was not a situation that could be handled quietly or slowly. A child had been taken from a house in a closed, familiar neighborhood. The list of people with direct access to Jersey in the hours before she disappeared was short. Investigators understood that in cases involving young children, the truth is almost never far from home. They started methodically, pulling on every available thread.
Desiree was questioned first. Detective Corporal J.C. Wiseman walked her through the entire evening in precise detail. When she left for work, when she returned, when she collected the girls, when she put them to bed, when she woke up and found Jersey's side of the bed empty. Her account held together completely, from beginning to end. No inconsistencies, no gaps that couldn't be explained. Just a mother in profound shock, doing everything she could to stay composed long enough to help. She was cleared. Her boyfriend, Brandon, was looked at next. His alibi was verified quickly and thoroughly. Workplace records and co-worker accounts confirmed he had been on shift during every relevant hour of that night. Cleared without complication. Then investigators turned to the couple next door. Amanda Holly gave a statement that aligned closely with everything Desiree had already told them. She confirmed she and Zachary had watched the girls that evening. She confirmed Jersey had gone home with her mother later that night. Nothing in her account raised immediate concern. She appeared cooperative, visibly distressed, and genuinely affected by what had happened.
And then it was Zachary's turn. 28-year-old Zachary Holly, neighbor, regular babysitter,
The man Jersey had trusted enough to call Uncle Zach. On the surface, he came across exactly the way you would expect an innocent person to come across. Cooperative, willing to help, visibly concerned. He handed over the clothes he had been wearing that night without being asked twice. He agreed to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. He answered every question put to him without apparent hesitation. But his account of that night contained one detail that investigators kept returning to. Zachary told officers that somewhere around 3:35 in the morning, he had woken up suddenly feeling unwell. Not wanting to disturb anyone in the house, he said he walked alone to the Easy Mart convenience store, roughly 15 yards away, to pick something up for an upset stomach. Surveillance footage from the store confirmed he was there at that time. He said he returned home shortly after, went straight back to bed, and didn't speak to anyone until morning. Taken on its own, that story is entirely possible. People get sick in the middle of the night. People make late convenience store runs. It happens all the time. But that same Easy Mart, the one Zachary said he walked to alone at 3:35 in the morning, was the exact same store Desiree drove to later that morning to find Brandon and tell him Jersey was missing. In a case built on reconstructing a precise minute-by-minute timeline, that kind of detail doesn't get overlooked. It gets noted, it gets examined, and it gets brought back to the person whose account put them there.
Zachary was brought in for a second round of questioning. His story didn't change. Calm, consistent, firm. He felt sick, he went to the store, he came home, he went to sleep. He had absolutely nothing to do with what happened to Jersey. At the Arkansas State Crime Lab in Little Rock, specialists were working around the clock. Through the Thanksgiving holiday and beyond, analysts processed everything gathered during the investigation, working carefully and methodically through every available piece of evidence. The findings they were building toward had the potential to shift the entire direction of the case. Everyone involved understood the weight of what was coming back from that lab. Back in the neighborhood, the community did what communities do when something incomprehensible happens. They came together. More than 100 people gathered at the Children's Advocacy Center for a candlelight memorial. They stood in the November cold, shoulder to shoulder, holding small flames in the dark. The atmosphere was heavy and quiet, in the way that public grief always is. People searching for something to say, and mostly finding that silence is the only honest response. Zachary Holly was among them, standing there in the cold, holding a flame, surrounded by the family and friends of a child he had taken less than 48 hours earlier. He stood there, and nobody knew. And that image of him in that crowd on that night, with that expression on his face, is one of the things the people on that street have said they cannot fully stop thinking about, even now. Two things happened in close succession and changed the direction of the investigation entirely. First, Zachary voluntarily reached out to investigators and offered to take a polygraph examination. Law enforcement agreed. The test was administered. 3 days later, the results came back. And second, more significantly, the analysis from the Arkansas State Crime Lab was completed. Those results pointed in one direction. Zachary was brought back in for questioning, one final time. But this conversation was fundamentally different from every previous one. Investigators walked in with specific information, details about the scene, details about the evidence, information that had been deliberately kept away from every press conference and every public statement since the beginning of the case. Details that only one person could possibly know, because only one person had been there. And somewhere in that questioning, something in Zachary Holly gave way. He stopped holding his account together. At a critical point during the interview, he provided investigators with a layout of the interior of the vacant house at number 74. He drew it himself, marked the hallway, indicated the bathroom, showed investigators exactly where he had been that night. The words of a man who had been inside that house.
A man who knew what had happened inside those walls. A man who could no longer maintain the distance between himself and what he had done. Zachary Holly was placed under arrest. The community reaction was immediate and raw, because this was not a stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. This was the man people had watched standing behind the police tape in the early morning hours of November 20th, wearing a blue striped beanie and a black jacket, watching the scene unfold alongside everyone else. This was the man who had sat with the family, the man who had been trusted, welcomed, and relied upon, the man Jersey called Uncle Zach. Zachary Holly was charged with capital murder, kidnapping, and residential burglary. He was taken into custody, and the case moved into its next phase. Before his first scheduled court appearance, an incident in the county jail involving another inmate who had entered his cell required intervention. The situation was contained quickly. Jail Captain Chris Sparks addressed it directly. He said they were going to do everything they could to make sure Holly stayed safe, just like any other inmate. It was a statement that captured the tension of that moment perfectly. A community consumed by grief and anger, a legal process that had barely begun, and a man at the center of all of it who had spent days standing among the people searching for the little girl he had taken.
He referenced small personal items belonging to Jersey that had been recovered and documented as part of the official process. Quiet details that underscored the human reality behind the legal proceedings. The courtroom went completely still. Some people looked away. Others couldn't hold back tears. Jersey's family sat close together, holding each other in the way people do when the alternative is falling apart completely. Zachary sat with his head down. No visible reaction. Laboratory findings were then presented by analysts from the Arkansas State Crime Lab. Specialist Lisa Channel explained that certain samples recovered during the investigation had not produced a definitive standalone result when compared to Zachary's reference profile, but she was careful to place that finding in context. The material had been exposed to external conditions over time. That single factor, she stressed, was not sufficient to draw a firm conclusion in either direction, and should not be considered in isolation from the broader body of evidence. Senior analyst Melissa Main then took the stand. She walked the jury through the results clearly, methodically, and without unnecessary complexity. Findings consistent with Zachary Holly's profile had been identified across multiple independent samples gathered from more than one location during the investigation. He was identified as the primary potential contributor to those findings. She chose her closing words carefully. I can't say this with 100% scientific certainty, but I can say with the same confidence that he cannot be excluded. In a room searching for clarity, those words carried unmistakable weight. Then came the moment that surprised nearly everyone in attendance. The defense called no witnesses, not one. And in both their opening statement and their closing argument, Zachary's attorney stopped just short of a full admission, essentially acknowledging to the jury that their client bore responsibility for what had happened to Jersey Bridgeman. It was not aimed at creating reasonable doubt. It was aimed entirely at what came next, the sentencing phase. The jury deliberated. It didn't take long. Zachary Holly was found guilty on all counts: unlawful entry into a residence, unlawful restraint of a child, additional serious offences, and the most serious charge of all, the intentional taking of a life. When the verdict was read, the courtroom shifted. Jersey's family held each other. Some cried openly. Others sat in silence, absorbing a word they had waited nearly 3 years to hear spoken aloud in an official setting. Guilty. A separate sentencing phase followed. The defense shifted its entire focus. Their goal was singular: seek the most lenient sentence available. To pursue that goal, they laid out Zachary's personal history in full. A representative from the Department of Human Services testified that there had been 15 separate investigations into Zachary's welfare as a minor.
He had lived in 9 different homes. He had attended 23 different schools. 23. That is not a childhood with roots. That is a childhood spent in constant motion, constantly adjusting, constantly losing whatever small sense of stability had briefly taken hold. The caseworker who testified did something notable. She didn't just present the facts, she acknowledged directly and without deflection that the system designed to protect children like Zachary had failed him, that he had been removed from an unsafe situation and returned too soon, that stronger intervention had been available and hadn't been taken.
Her testimony didn't change what Zachary had done. No one in that room believed it did. But it landed with a particular kind of weight, the uncomfortable recognition that broken systems and the people who emerge from them are often connected in ways that are easier to ignore than to confront. The jury listened to all of it. They weighed the severity of the case against the history of the man standing before them, and then they returned. Zachary Holly was sentenced to 20 years in prison for unlawful entry into a residence. 2 life sentences were imposed for the remaining serious charges. And for the most serious charge of all, under circumstances the court found to be especially aggravating, the jury handed down the heaviest sentence available under Arkansas state law. After the sentence was announced, defense attorneys moved through the jury one by one, formally asking each member to confirm that the decision was unanimous. Each juror said yes. The conviction was appealed. Zachary's attorneys identified several specific points they believed warranted review: a pre-trial motion, the admissibility of his police statements, and the question of whether the jury had been properly informed of a guilty plea Zachary had been willing to enter on one of the charges.
The Arkansas Supreme Court reviewed each argument thoroughly and rejected all of them. The conviction was upheld. The sentence was upheld. For Benton County Prosecutor Nathan Smith, the ruling brought a measure of closure that went beyond the professional. He said publicly that he hoped the decision would reduce the likelihood that Jersey's family would have to endure yet another court proceeding. Because every new filing, every new hearing, every new round of arguments means pulling a grieving family back into proximity with the worst chapter of their lives. It means Jersey's name appearing in legal documents again. It means her story being examined and re-examined in cold institutional language. It means no rest. The challenge did not succeed. As of the most recent available information, Zachary Holly remains inside a high-security facility in Arkansas, serving his sentence. Jersey Bridgeman was 6 years old. She had just celebrated her birthday 6 days before she was taken. She loved being a big sister. She took that role seriously, with a tenderness that seemed beyond her years. She used the phrase "to the moon and back" so often that it had become her signature, the small, sweet way she ended every day. She had already survived things that most children never face. She had come out of them smiling. She had just started to settle into what a safe childhood could feel like: a consistent home, a school she attended every day, a street where people knew her name, a routine that felt like it belonged to her.
She had just started to settle into it when it was taken away. The community of Bentonville has never fully put this one down. The candlelight memorial in those first raw days, the purple worn by students and staff at Sugar Creek Elementary, the quiet, dignified way an entire neighborhood tried to hold itself together while processing something that made no sense and never fully would. There is a lesson in this case that is impossible to avoid. Danger rarely looks the way we expect it to. It does not announce itself. It does not stand apart from the crowd. Sometimes it lives next door. Sometimes it helps watch the kids when you work late. Sometimes it stands behind the police tape with everyone else, holding a candle in the dark, wearing the right expression, saying the right things. That ordinariness, that complete, seamless ordinariness,
is the thing that stays with the people who lived on that street long after everything else has faded. Jersey called him Uncle Zach. She trusted him, the way a 6-year-old trusts the familiar adults in her world, completely.
Without calculation, because that is what children do, and what children deserve to be able to do. That trust was not honoured, and the weight of that failure is something the people who loved her will carry for the rest of their lives. I want to know what you think the hardest part of a case like this is. Not the verdict, not the evidence, but the part that stays with you after. Drop it below. I read every single one. Jersey Bridgeman was 6 years old. She loved her little sister. She said goodnight to the moon and back. She deserved every single day she never got to live.